Hey guys, tonight we're diving into something that started with a simple knock on my door, but ended up shaking everything I believed about my family. You probably won't survive this story. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to watch the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I'm doing here. Now turn off the lights, maybe turn on the fan for some soothing noise, and let's comfortably embark on tonight's journey. It was one of those dusky evenings when the sunlight turns gold before slipping into shadow. The air smelled faintly of wet earth, the kind of smell that always made me think of my husband David. I had just finished making tea, the TV humming softly in the background, when I heard the knock, slow, steady, deliberate. At first, I thought it was the mailman, maybe a neighbor asking to borrow something, but when I opened the door, the man standing there wasn't from around here. He wore a charcoal suit perfectly pressed and held a brown envelope in his hand. He looked too calm, too certain. "Mrs. Collins," he asked, "I have something that belongs to your family." Those words, "belongs to your family." They sounded formal, rehearsed, almost rehearsed like a lawyer's phrase. My fingers hesitated on the doorknob. "Who are you?" I asked. He introduced himself as Mr. Gray, and for some reason that name immediately made me uneasy. He handed me the envelope, nodded politely, and said, "This concerns your late husband's contract. Please take a look." I remember the way my stomach dropped at the word contract. It wasn't grief that hit me. It was confusion. David passed away 2 years ago, and in that time I had carefully handled every bit of paperwork, the house deed, the will, the insurance. There was nothing left to sign, nothing left to hide. What kind of contract, I asked, but the man only said, "You'll understand once you read it." Then without waiting for a response, he turned, walked down the steps, and disappeared into the mist. That's the thing about strangers. They never knock just once. They leave echoes. I closed the door, the sound of it clicking like a lock sealing my fate. Sitting at the kitchen table, I stared at the envelope. The paper was heavy, not the kind you'd find at a grocery store. On the front, written in neat black ink, was my husband's full name, David Jonathan Collins. My heart twisted. The handwriting wasn't his, but seeing his name felt like opening an old wound. People still debate whether curiosity saves or destroys you. I decided to open it. Inside, there were several sheets of legal paper stamped and signed. My name appeared in a few places, but not as a signatory. David's signature, though his old confident scrawl, was right there at the bottom of a document titled Family Asset Transfer Agreement. I read the words twice, but they didn't make sense. It said something about transferring ownership of the Collins property under certain terms to a beneficiary named Thomas Collins. My son, I froze. My son's name. The date on the document was from 5 years before David's death, 5 years before my husband's heart attack, before the family started unraveling over money and unspoken grudges. And somehow, I had never seen it. I felt a tremor in my hands, not from fear, but from betrayal. David and I never kept secrets, or at least that's what I believed. There was something especially cruel about learning new secrets from someone who was no longer alive to explain them. I stood up, pacing the kitchen. The walls felt too tight, the ticking clock too loud. My eyes landed on the photo on the wall, our wedding picture. I wondered if he'd already been planning this when we smiled for that photo, pretending forever meant the same thing for both of us. I made myself a fresh cup of tea, though my throat was dry. The psychologist in me, that part that used to read family advice columns in magazines, whispered that I might be overreacting. After all, people sign things all the time, right? But another voice, the older, quieter one, said this was the beginning of something big, something I wasn't prepared for. And here's the strange part in family law, especially in inheritance cases, a contract can sometimes override a will. Most people don't know that. They think wills are final, but certain agreements made before death can actually change who owns what. And if this was one of those cases, then my son might already own this house without ever needing to tell me. The phone rang, startling me. I picked it up, expecting maybe a wrong number or a telemarketer, but it was Thomas, my son. His voice was calm, almost too calm. "Mom," he said, "did someone drop something off for you tonight?" My heart skipped. "How would you know that?" I asked. He paused. "Because I told him to." The silence that followed felt like the longest of my life. I didn't answer at first. My hand tightened around the phone, the heat of the tea forgotten beside me. "You told him to?" I finally said, my voice trembling between anger and disbelief. "Thomas, what are you talking about?" On the other end, there was a sigh, one I recognized too well, the kind he used to give when he was a teenager and didn't want to admit he'd done something wrong. "Mom, it's complicated," he said, "but it's better if you just look through the papers before we talk." Okay, then the line went dead. I stood there frozen with the quiet hum of the refrigerator filling the room. It's funny how the smallest things, a breath, a pause, can tell you that your own child is keeping a secret. I had raised him alone after David's passing, trying to keep the family together even when we drifted apart after his divorce. He used to come for dinner every Sunday, but those visits had slowly stopped, replaced by vague excuses and postponed calls. And now, out of nowhere, there was a stranger and a contract. I went back to the table and spread out the documents again. The papers smelled faintly of old ink and metal like they had been locked away for years. David's signature was there twice, one for the property transfer, another for a clause that read, "Mutual beneficiary agreement effective upon fulfillment of the specified condition." I had no idea what that condition was, and then I saw it, a notarized stamp dated 3 months before David's death. My head started spinning. That night, I barely slept. I kept hearing that knock again and again, like a metronome, marking the rhythm of my thoughts. Around 3 a.m., I went to the attic and opened an old box of David's files. He had always been methodical, every bill, every insurance paper neatly labeled. But there was one folder missing: property and legal. People still debate whether it's better to leave the dead in peace or dig up what they've buried. I wasn't sure anymore. The next morning, I called the notary's office, printed on the document. A young clerk answered, and after checking the record, confirmed that yes, the papers were real. It was handled through Mr. Gray, she added. My stomach dropped. So that man at my door wasn't just any messenger. He was part of something that started long before I knew. I decided to confront Thomas directly. I drove to his house, a modern brick home on the other side of town, clean lawn, 2 cars in the driveway. His wife, Rebecca, opened the door. Her smile faded when she saw me. "Your mother's here?" she called out, and Thomas appeared, his face, pale hair, slightly unkempt. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in days. Inside, the air smelled like coffee and tension. I laid the envelope on the kitchen counter. "Explain," I said. He rubbed his face, then finally spoke. Dad wanted to make sure the house stayed in the family. He didn't trust what would happen if you decided to sell it one day. My jaw tightened. Sell it. Thomas, I have lived there for 40 years. I planted every rose bush in that garden. What could make you think I'd sell it? He didn't meet my eyes. "Because after his heart attack, you mentioned wanting to move to Florida," he said quietly. Dad panicked. He said the house needed to stay in Colin's hands, so he drew up a family contract. He told me to sign just in case. I felt like the floor shifted beneath me, and you didn't think to tell me. He looked ashamed, but not enough. Dad made me promise. He said it was between us. It's strange how betrayal can sound so casual, like weather, like something that just happens. I left without saying goodbye. Driving home, I realized how fragile family trust really is. It's not built on love alone, but on transparency. Psychologists say most family rifts begin not with money, but with secrecy. I believe that more than ever now. That afternoon, I sat at my desk, staring at the contract again. At the bottom of one page, written in faint pencil, was a number 14B. It didn't match any document reference. My curiosity flared again. I searched every page until I noticed a corner folded twice, and underneath a small note, written in David's handwriting, "Check the drawer." I went to his old desk in the study, the one I hadn't touched since the funeral. In the bottom drawer, taped beneath a wooden divider, was a thin envelope labeled "Private." Inside were photocopies of the same contract, but one page was different. It had another signature. Mr. Gray's. That name again. The last line on the page read, "Upon the passing of David J. Collins, the agent shall deliver this agreement to the surviving spouse for disclosure." Disclosure, not execution. Meaning I wasn't supposed to lose anything. I was supposed to learn something. But what? The phone buzzed again. This time it was Rebecca. Her message said, "Please come to dinner tonight. Thomas wants to talk. People say family dinners heal everything. In my experience, they just expose what's been hiding under the tablecloth." I texted back one word, "Fine." Then I took a deep breath and looked at the window where the last evening light was fading the same color as the day before, when the stranger had first knocked. I didn't know then that dinner would end with more questions than answers. Dinner at my son's house had always been a simple affair. Sunday roasts laughter, and that familiar clinking of glasses that meant family still meant something. But that night, the air felt different. When I arrived, Rebecca greeted me with the kind of politeness that hides fear. The table was set, candles flickering, but the tension was visible in the way she kept adjusting the napkins. Thomas sat at the head of the table, his laptop open beside his plate. No one spoke for a long minute, just the faint hum of the refrigerator and the sound of my own heartbeat. Mom Thomas finally said, "I need you to listen before you get angry." I smiled tightly. That's what people say when they already know you'll be angry. He exhaled. "Mr. Gray is my lawyer. The contract was real, but it's not what you think. Dad signed it because of a business deal, one that never finished. The house was collateral, technically, but it's safe now. It's under my name, so it can't be claimed." My fork froze halfway to my mouth. "Under your name?" I repeated slowly. "You're saying I don't legally own my own home." Thomas rubbed his temples. "It's not that simple. The house is protected." That word made me laugh, a sharp, humorless sound. "Protected from whom, Thomas? Me?" He winced. "Dad was trying to protect it from the bank. He owed something, a business loan from years ago. I didn't want you to panic, so You what?" I interrupted. "You just signed everything away behind my back." Rebecca shifted uncomfortably. "Please, let's not fight," she murmured, but I ignored her. My son's face looked older than I remembered, his jaw tight, eyes tired. He wasn't cruel, but he was hiding something still. "Mom," he said quietly, "I didn't know Mr. Gray would show up so soon. There's a process happening. He's finalizing things. He said the bank found inconsistencies with Dad's papers." I leaned back. "Inconsistencies? Thomas, what kind of inconsistencies?" He hesitated. "The signatures." A chill ran through me. "You mean David's signatures?" He nodded slowly. "One of them might be forged." For a second, everything went silent. I heard only the faint creak of the ceiling fan above us. I tried to speak, but no sound came out. Finally, I whispered, "Who would forge my husband's signature?" Thomas looked down. "That's what Mr. Gray is trying to figure out. He said someone accessed Dad's old business records after he passed." I pushed back my chair. "You should have told me this from the beginning." He looked at me, then really looked at me with that same frightened expression he had the day his father died. "I was trying to protect you, Mom. You've already lost so much." I wanted to yell to remind him that secrecy doesn't protect, it poisons. Instead, I stood up and said, "Then let's stop pretending we're a family that communicates." I left the table without finishing dinner. Outside, the evening was humid, the sky bruised with clouds. I walked aimlessly down the street until I ended up near the old park where David and I used to take Thomas as a boy. That's where I sat trying to piece everything together. My husband's secret contract, my son's lawyer, a stranger's visit, and now forged signatures. People still debate whether family loyalty should mean silence or truth. I used to believe silence was kindness. Now I wasn't so sure. When I returned home, the first thing I did was pour myself a glass of water and open the contract again. This time I looked more carefully at the notary stamp. It was from a small firm downtown, Holbrook and Associates. The name sounded familiar. Then I remembered that's where David once worked as a financial consultant in the late 80s. Could someone from that office have forged his name years later? I decided to find out. The next morning, I went to the address printed on the stamp. The building was old, the paint peeling, and the reception area smelled faintly of paper and mildew. A young woman behind the desk smiled. "Good morning. Do you have an appointment?" "No," I said. "I'm looking for someone who worked here about 6 years ago, a Mr. David Collins." Her smile faded. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but this office changed management 5 years ago. The previous owner sold the business to a private client." I frowned. "And who was that client?" She checked a file, then looked up. "Mr. Gray." I felt my stomach twist. He was everywhere, in every corner of this mystery. The stranger who knocked on my door wasn't just a messenger. He was part of something far older, something tangled in David's past. On my way out, the receptionist called after me. "Mrs. Collins, there's a note in our archives addressed to you. Would you like to see it?" My heart raced. I followed her to a dusty back room. She handed me an envelope yellowed with age. The handwriting on the front was unmistakable. It was David's. Inside was a single line written in ink. "If Gray comes to you, listen, but don't trust." The words hit me like a whisper from the grave. I folded the note, slipped it into my purse, and walked out into the rain. That night, I sat by the window staring at the streetlights, the note resting on the table beside my tea. My mind was spinning, but one thing was clear: if my husband didn't trust Mr. Gray, then I needed to find out who he really was before he decided what would happen to the house I'd built my life around. The next morning, I woke up to a dull ache behind my eyes, the kind that comes from sleepless nights and too many thoughts you can't put down. The house felt hollow. You know that strange quiet where every sound seems louder, where the creak of the floor feels like someone breathing beside you? That's how it was. I brewed coffee just to have something warm to hold, staring at the steam curling up like questions I couldn't answer. I decided that if the truth was buried in that contract, I wasn't going to dig alone anymore. I called for a family meeting. Thomas didn't sound thrilled, but he agreed. Rebecca promised to come, and even my daughter Lily, who hadn't visited in months, texted a cold, "I'll be there." It was the first time all of us would sit together since David's funeral. By evening, the house smelled like roasted chicken and anxiety. I wanted it to feel normal family around the table, laughter, maybe forgiveness. But what I got was the sound of forks scraping against plates and eyes that didn't meet. Lily arrived late, looking guarded, dressed like she came straight from work. "So what's this about?" she asked, sliding into a chair. Thomas said something about paperwork. I glanced at Thomas. "Why don't you explain it since you seem to know more than I do?" he sighed. "Mom found a contract. It's about the house. Dad signed it years ago." Lily raised an eyebrow. "You mean the same house I grew up in? What about it?" Rebecca cleared her throat softly. "It's complicated." "No, I said it's secretive. There's a difference." Thomas tried to keep his voice calm. "Look, Dad was trying to protect our assets. The contract technically makes me the primary beneficiary of the estate. But what Lily cut in, you get everything." He hesitated, and that was enough of an answer. Lily let out a bitter laugh. "Typical. Dad always trusted you more. The golden son." "That's not fair," Thomas snapped. "You moved away. You didn't want to be part of anything?" "Oh, please," she said, eyes flashing. "I didn't move away. I was pushed out. You two made all the decisions while Mom stayed quiet." Her words hit harder than I expected. Because she was right. I had stayed quiet. I thought silence kept peace. Turns out, it just builds walls. People still debate whether family peace comes from honesty or denial. I used to think keeping secrets was love. Now all it brought me was resentment. Rebecca tried to mediate. "Please, both of you, this isn't helping." But Lily stood up. "You know what's not helping? Finding out that my dad signed away our home and none of you thought I should know." I felt my chest tighten. "Lily, sit down, please." She didn't. "No, Mom, you always defend him. You did it when he left for work trips that lasted weeks. You did it when he promised to pay for my college and forgot. And now you're defending this." I closed my eyes. For a moment, all I could see was David laughing, confident, alive, promising us we'd never have to worry about anything. And now his promises were paper weapons tearing us apart. Thomas's voice softened. "Lily, I didn't want this. I just thought—" "You thought she said you could decide what's best for everyone." Then, from the corner of my eye, I noticed Rebecca. She hadn't said much all evening, but now she looked pale, almost frightened. Her hands were shaking as she reached for her glass of wine. "Thomas," she whispered, "maybe she deserves to know the rest." He turned to her sharply. "Rebecca, don't." I frowned. "The rest of what?" Rebecca hesitated. "Mr. Gray contacted us weeks before he came to you. He said there was a missing beneficiary mentioned in the original contract." "What?" I asked. She swallowed hard. "A missing beneficiary, someone else entitled to part of the estate. Someone David listed before he changed the will." My fork clattered to the plate. "Who?" Rebecca looked at Thomas, but he said nothing. I pressed again, louder this time. "Who, Thomas?" He exhaled, defeated. "A woman named Elaine Foster." I felt dizzy. That name, it was familiar, like an echo from years ago. "Elaine," I repeated. "Your father's business partner." He nodded slowly. The room fell silent except for the ticking clock on the wall. My heart felt like it was beating inside that sound. "I thought she died," I whispered. "She did," Thomas said. "But apparently, she had a daughter. And according to the document, Dad promised her a share of the property if anything happened to him." Lily sat down again, eyes wide. "Wait, so there's another heir?" I leaned back, gripping the edge of the table. Why didn't Mr. Gray tell me this? Thomas's jaw tightened. Because he's the one representing her. It was like the air went out of the room. My voice came out colder than I expected. So this stranger shows up at my door pretending to deliver a message, but he's actually working for someone who wants a piece of my home. Thomas lowered his head. I didn't know that at first. Lily crossed her arms. You always know, Thomas. He stood abruptly, sending his chair scraping across the floor. I'm trying to fix it. Do you think I wanted any of this? But his anger didn't fill the room. It revealed how broken we already were. Rebecca began to cry softly. Maybe this family's been cursed with too many secrets. I looked around the table at my grown children at the house David and I built, now just a pile of papers and accusations, and I thought about how every family thinks betrayal will never happen to them, until it does. When everyone left, the candles had burned down to stubs. I sat there alone in the quiet dining room, staring at the empty plates, wondering what other ghosts from David's past were still out there waiting to knock on my door. After that dinner, I couldn't look at my family the same way. The walls of the house seemed to echo with things that had been said and the things we were still afraid to say. I kept replaying the name Elaine Foster in my mind like a splinter I couldn't remove. Her daughter, a mysterious beneficiary, and that ever-present stranger, Mr. Gray, holding my husband's secrets like a deck of marked cards. I barely slept that night. When I did drift off, I dreamed of David standing at the end of our hallway, knocking on our own front door. When I opened it, he just smiled and said, "Read between the lines." The next morning, I went straight to the attic. There was a box I hadn't touched in years filled with old photographs, tax records, and letters David kept from his early business days. Dust coated everything, but beneath the clutter, I found an envelope marked Elaine, 1998. My hands trembled as I pulled out a faded photograph, David and a woman standing together in front of an office building, smiling. He looked young, happy, confident. I flipped it over. On the back in his handwriting was a short note. Promise delivered. Trust remains. That phrase haunted me. What promise? What trust? I dug deeper and found an old contract draft stapled to a letter from a law firm, the same Halbrook and Associates. The letter referenced joint ownership rights over an investment property. Not our house, but a company property David and Elaine had apparently co-signed for. The human mind does something cruel when it encounters betrayal. It tries to rewrite memory. I started recalling moments that once seemed harmless, late-night phone calls David took outside the weekend trips for work. The envelopes marked confidential he never discussed. At the time, I dismissed them. After all, trust was the foundation of marriage, wasn't it? People still debate whether it's better to know everything about the person you love or preserve a few mysteries to keep the peace. I used to think mystery kept love alive. Now I realized mystery could also bury it. By noon, I decided I needed answers not from the dead, but from the living. I called Mr. Gray. He didn't sound surprised. "Mrs. Collins," he said smoothly, "I expected your call. You're representing Elaine Foster's daughter," I said. "Aren't you?" He hesitated just long enough to confirm it. "Yes, her name is Claire. She's currently abroad, but she has full legal rights under the supplemental agreement signed by your husband." I took a deep breath. "I want to see that document." "I'm afraid that's not possible," he replied. "It's under legal review, but if you'd like, we can arrange a meeting to discuss settlement options." "Settlement?" I repeated, my voice rising. "You talk like I'm a criminal. This is my home. I'm simply following the law." "Mrs. Collins," he said calmly, "you of all people should appreciate that your husband's wishes were layered." The way he said layered made my skin crawl. "You seem to know an awful lot about my husband," I said sharply. "I worked with him," he replied, "in ways you might not have known." Something inside me snapped. "Then tell me," I demanded. "What kind of man was he to you?" Gray chuckled softly. "A man who didn't trust easily, not even those closest to him." Then he hung up. I stood there, phone still pressed to my ear, heart pounding. For the first time, I wondered if I'd ever really known David at all. That evening, I decided to visit the county records office. The clerk, a gray-haired man with thick glasses, helped me search through property archives. When he brought out the original deed to our home, I noticed something unusual, a handwritten amendment on the final page dated 3 months before David's death. It referred to Clause 12B, conditional fulfillment upon co-consent. My breath caught. I remembered the 14B penciled into the corner of my husband's copy. Could the two be connected? The clerk nodded slowly. Conditional fulfillment means the property changes hands only if both parties meet certain requirements, he explained. But without the attached clause, it's incomplete. Is there a record of that clause? I asked. He shrugged. If there is, it's missing from the public file. Maybe sealed, maybe destroyed. I left with a photocopy of what little remained. The wind outside was sharp, pulling at my coat as if the world itself wanted to tear the papers from my hand. When I got home, I called Lily. She answered on the second ring. Mom, are you okay? No, I admitted, and neither are you. She laughed bitterly. What did Thomas do now? Nothing. This isn't about him. It's about your father. There was a pause. What about him? I told her about Elaine, about the second contract, about Mr. Gray's words. By the time I finished, she was silent. I always thought Dad kept secrets, she said finally. He was too smooth, too calm. Remember when you caught him sleeping in his office for a week? You said he was stressed about work, but I always thought it was something else. Why didn't you ever tell me that? I asked quietly. Because you didn't want to hear it, Mom, she said. You wanted to believe he was perfect. That hit harder than she knew. After we hung up, I sat at David's old desk again, tracing my fingers over the wood. In one of the drawers hidden under his old appointment books, I found a small, folded note. It looked newer than the others, like it had been placed there intentionally. It read, "If you're reading this, it means Gray has come. Don't fight him directly. Follow the clause." The clause. That same mysterious clause, 14B. I spent the rest of the night searching every paper in the house, every folder, every cabinet. Around midnight, I found a manila envelope tucked behind a loose panel in the study wall. Inside was the missing clause, one single page signed by both David and Mr. Gray. The header read, Clause 14B, Conditional Fulfillment Agreement. And then I understood everything. The clause stated that upon David's death, ownership of the Collins property would not transfer to any single individual. Instead, it would only be granted jointly if all surviving family members, myself, Thomas and Lily, came to a unanimous decision about its future. If we failed to agree, the property would be sold and proceeds divided between the Collins family and the Foster estate. It wasn't about inheritance. It was about unity, a test David built into his legacy. My chest tightened. This wasn't a contract of betrayal. It was his last desperate attempt to keep us together, to force us to face our fractures. But it had backfired. Instead of uniting us, it tore us apart. The next morning, I called Thomas and Lily and told them to meet me at the house that evening. No lawyers, I said firmly. No excuses. Just family. When they arrived, the air between them was tense, but thinner than before, the kind of silence that holds more fatigue than anger. I laid the clause on the table and explained what I'd found. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Lily whispered, "He was trying to make us talk." Thomas looked down at his hands. He always said family was an agreement, not a gift. Rebecca, who had quietly joined us, nodded through tears. Maybe this is his way of making sure that agreement never broke, even after he was gone. I looked at both of them. The contract isn't about money or houses or who gets what. It's about whether we can forgive each other long enough to make a choice together. That's what he wanted. The three of us sat there for a long time, the weight of years pressing down on the table between us. People still debate whether family bonds can survive betrayal. I didn't have an answer. But that night, I felt something shift, a small, fragile thread pulling us back toward each other. For the first time in weeks, the house didn't feel like a battlefield. It felt like a negotiation table, fragile, tense, but still alive. The paper sat in the middle of the dining table like a guest we didn't invite but couldn't ignore. Thomas leaned forward, tracing the ink of David's signature with his finger. Lily kept pacing near the window, her arms crossed her mind, obviously somewhere else. "So what happens now?" she asked. I hesitated before answering. Clause 14B says we have to decide together. If we agree on what happens to the property, it stays ours. If not, the estate gets split between us and the Fosters. She shook her head. And if we don't agree, then Mr. Gray wins, I said quietly. That name hung in the air like smoke. I could see Lily's jaw tighten. I don't trust him. Why would Dad ever tie our future to that man? Thomas sighed. Maybe because he thought Gray was reliable. They did business together for years. Reliable, she shot back. He's been manipulating us from the beginning. It's strange, every family thinks they can handle the truth until it actually sits at their table. Then they realize truth doesn't fix what's broken. It just shows where the cracks are. Rebecca brought coffee, her hands still trembling. Maybe your father believed Mr. Gray could protect his intentions, she said softly. Maybe he wanted to make sure no one could twist his legacy after he was gone. Thomas looked at her with quiet guilt. You mean like I did? Like all of us did, I corrected. We made assumptions instead of asking questions. Lily stopped pacing. Then let's start asking them now. Mom, how much do we even know about this Elaine Foster, or her daughter? That question hit me like a cold breeze. Not enough, I admitted. But I know your father worked with Elaine for nearly a decade. They ran a consulting branch together. She died suddenly, a car accident. I remember the funeral, though David barely spoke a word about it afterward. Did you ever meet her daughter, Lily asked. No, I said, shaking my head. But if Mr. Gray is her lawyer, she must be real. Thomas frowned. We can't just take his word for it. We should find her ourselves. That spark of determination reminded me of his father, the same tone David used when he wanted to fix something before it got worse. I agreed. Let's start with the records. Her mother's estate might have public files. The next day, we drove downtown together, all three of us in the same car like old times. The silence between us wasn't warm, but it wasn't sharp anymore either. It was the silence of people trying to heal, even if they didn't know how yet. At the courthouse, Lily took charge. She'd always been better at research. Within an hour, she found an archive entry for Elaine M. Foster, deceased 2003. Listed as next of kin, Claire Foster, born 1990, current residence unknown. But then there was something else, a scanned note attached to the file added 10 years after the death. It said, executor transferred to G. Gray representing the Foster estate. So Mr. Gray had taken control of her estate a decade ago, long before David died. I felt my stomach twist. He's been planning this for years. Thomas leaned over my shoulder, or protecting it. We still don't know which. The records clerk noticed our confusion. Are you the Collins family? He asked. I hesitated. Yes, why? He pulled out a small envelope from a separate drawer. This was left for you. It's marked private deliver only upon joint appearance of Collins family members. I looked at Thomas and Lily. For once, we didn't argue. We opened it together. Inside was a handwritten note on age stationery. The handwriting was David's. It said, if you're reading this, you've found Clause 14B. That means Gray did what I asked. Don't hate him. He's only the messenger. The real message is, this family isn't inherited. It's renewed. If you can agree on what matters most, you'll earn what I couldn't give you while I was alive. But if you can't, then let go. Some homes aren't meant to be kept, only remembered. I couldn't breathe for a moment. My husband, who I'd accused of secrecy, had actually been trying to write one final lesson for us. Not a warning, but a test of our love. Lily was the first to speak. So it wasn't about money. No, I said softly, it was about us. Thomas's voice cracked. He wanted us to forgive each other. We drove home in silence. The sunlight outside seemed brighter, almost too bright after the darkness we'd been carrying. When we reached the house, I realized I hadn't looked at it properly in months. The chipped paint, the sagging porch, the rose bushes David planted, the year we got married, they all felt like clues I'd been too angry to see. That evening, we sat in the living room together. The documents were spread out like a map of our family's past. So what now? Thomas asked. I thought for a moment. We follow his instructions. We decide what matters most. Rebecca spoke softly. He wanted you to choose between keeping the house or letting it go. Lily frowned. Selling it would mean splitting it with the Foster estate. Keeping it means living with the weight of all this history. People still debate whether closure comes from holding on or letting go. I used to think keeping what's yours meant strength. But sometimes holding on too long becomes another form of loss. Thomas looked at me. What do you want, Mom? I smiled faintly. I want peace. And peace doesn't always come with walls and keys. We spent the next few days talking, arguing, crying, reliving memories we had long buried. I learned things about my children I never knew. Lily's fear of failure. Thomas's guilt over leaving his marriage to crumble while trying to live up to his father's standards. And in those nights of conversation, something started to heal between us. One evening, Rebecca brought out old family albums. We laughed at the awkward hairstyles, the birthday cakes that leaned too far on one side, the camping trips where David insisted on using maps instead of GPS. For the first time, we remembered him without bitterness. Then came the knock. It was soft, almost polite, but familiar. I opened the door to see Mr. Gray standing there, again raincoat, glistening from a drizzle outside. His face was unreadable, calm as ever. Mrs. Collins, he said, I see you found Clause 14B. Yes, I said steadily. And we've decided. He looked slightly surprised. Already, Thomas stepped beside me. We're keeping the house. Together, joint ownership. Gray studied us in silence, then nodded slowly. Then my work here is done. Before he turned to leave, I asked, "Why did you do it this way? Why all the secrecy?" He smiled faintly, the kind of smile that hides decades of truth. "Your husband once told me, if they can find the truth on their own, they'll finally understand what I couldn't say." He reached into his coat pocket and handed me one final envelope. He asked me to give you this when the family reached a decision. After he left, I closed the door, heart pounding. The envelope was sealed with wax, David's initials pressed into it. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside was a single page, a handwritten letter dated 1 week before he died. It began simply, "My love. If you're reading this, then you did what I hoped. You faced the storm not by fighting it, but by facing each other." The words blurred as my eyes filled with tears. I read it aloud, my voice trembling. But for the first time, the house didn't feel haunted anymore. It felt alive. David's letter felt like a voice resurrected from the past, not the man who left secrets behind, but the man I'd fallen in love with 45 years ago. His handwriting had always been bold and deliberate, each stroke steady as if he knew the future might depend on it. I sat in the living room with Thomas and Lily beside me, the paper trembling slightly in my hands. Rebecca poured tea in silence, and for once, no one felt the need to fill the air with words. It was as if the house itself was holding its breath, waiting for what came next. I began to read. "My love." The letter said, "This contract isn't a trap. It's a bridge. I know how our children drifted apart. I know how silence filled the spaces where laughter used to live. I didn't know how to fix it while I was alive. So I did what I knew best. I built something to hold you all together even after I was gone. You'll think I hid things from you, but what I really did was leave you something only love could unlock the truth. That family isn't about ownership, but about choice. If you three can agree, it means you still believe in each other. And that's all I ever wanted." I stopped reading because my voice cracked. Lily's eyes glistened, and even Thomas wiped his face when he thought I wasn't looking. The last line hit harder than the rest. "And if you ever doubt me, look under the oak tree." "The oak tree?" Lily asked. "The one in the backyard," I whispered. "The one he planted the year Thomas was born." We looked at each other. Then without another word, we grabbed our coats and went outside. The air was crisp, heavy, with the scent of rain. The old oak stood tall and solemn, its bark gnarled and strong roots stretching deep into the earth, just like the family David had tried to keep rooted together. Thomas fetched a shovel from the shed, and we began to dig near the base. Each layer of soil felt like we were peeling back years of silence. The metal finally hit something solid, a tin box, rusted but intact. Thomas knelt and pried it open carefully. Inside, wrapped in a plastic bag, were photographs, a USB drive, and a smaller envelope marked, "For my family." I opened the envelope first. Inside was a second letter, shorter this time, written to all of us. "To my wife and children, if you've found this, then you've done what I couldn't face each other. Inside this box are the stories you've forgotten, the day you laughed until midnight, the first house we almost bought, and didn't. The day Lily fell off her bike and Thomas carried her home. You'll find copies of everything I left behind, including the true record of the foster partnership. Elaine's daughter was never after your inheritance. I funded her education years ago, and this agreement ensured she'd be taken care of, nothing more. Don't fight her, she's as much a part of my story as you are. Love each other. Forgive me for the way I chose to keep you together. I trusted time to explain what I couldn't." I felt the tears spill freely now. Lily pulled out one of the photographs, a family picnic, the four of us laughing by the lake. "He kept these all this time," she said softly. Thomas picked up the USB drive. "What do you think is on it? Let's find out," I said. Inside, David's voice greeted us from the past. The screen flickered to life, showing him sitting in his office, the same suit he wore in his obituary photo. His smile was gentle, his eyes tired. "Hey, you three," he began with a small laugh. "If you're watching this, it means the world outlived me, but you didn't stop fighting. Good. That means you still care. I know you're angry, confused. You think I should have trusted you with everything. Maybe you're right, but trust isn't about giving. It's about earning back what's been lost. And we lost something a long time ago. Not money, not property connection." He paused, looking straight into the camera. Thomas, I know you've been carrying my expectations like weights. You don't have to anymore. You don't have to fix everything. Lily, I know you felt unseen. I was too proud to admit I saw too much of myself in you. And Rebecca. He hesitated, exhaled. Take care of them. You always saw the truth before I did. Then his eyes softened and his voice lowered. And to my love, thank you for never giving up on us, even when I made it hard. You'll think I left a mess behind, but really I left a map. Follow it together and it'll lead you back home. The video ended. The room was silent except for the faint hum of the laptop. For a moment, we didn't move. It's strange how grief doesn't just revisit, it reinvents itself. Hearing his voice again was like having him in the room, but this time without the walls between us. I realized something that night. We had all been living different versions of the same loss. People still debate whether closure ever truly exists. Some say it's a myth, a word we use to pretend we've made peace. But maybe closure isn't about forgetting. Maybe it's about understanding why it hurt so much to begin with. Later, after everyone went home, I stayed up watching the video again. This time, I noticed something in the background, a painting on the wall, one I'd never seen before. It was of our house, but the colors were brighter, the garden fuller, as if painted from memory rather than sight. On the back of the canvas, faintly visible, were the words, "The Collins Legacy." David had planned everything, even the ending. The next morning, I woke up feeling lighter, but also restless. Mr. Gray hadn't contacted us again, and part of me wondered if he ever would. Then around noon, there was a knock. When I opened the door, it wasn't Mr. Gray this time. It was a young woman no older than 35 with dark eyes and an envelope in her hand. "Mrs. Collins?" she asked. "My name is Claire Foster." Time seemed to stop. I invited her in, my heart racing. She smiled politely, though her expression carried the same grief I'd seen in the mirror for years. "I'm sorry for the way all this happened," she said softly. "Mr. Gray told me about your husband's clause. My mother always said he was an honorable man." Her voice trembled when she said my mother. I could tell she'd lost her too soon. She handed me the envelope. Inside was a copy of a bank statement, an education trust fund created by David Collins 20 years ago. The beneficiary, Claire Foster. The donor note read, "To ensure her mother's work lives on." I looked up at her speechless. "You came all this way to show me this," she nodded. "Because I didn't want you to think this was about money. My mother trusted him, and when he died, I wanted to make sure his trust in me wasn't misunderstood. It was like a storm clearing after months of darkness. All the noise, all the doubt, all the anger gone, replaced by something quiet, something human. I asked if she'd like some tea, and she smiled. I'd like that. We sat at the same kitchen table where the whole mess began, two women bound by one man's complicated love for the people he left behind. Before she left, Claire stood at the doorway and said, "He wanted you to have peace. I think in his own way, he gave it to you." After she was gone, I looked around the house, the cracked window in the hallway, the photo of David on the mantel, the oak tree swaying outside. For the first time, it didn't feel like a burden. It felt like a home again. When the door closed behind Claire, the silence that followed wasn't empty, it was full of everything that had finally settled into place after weeks of chaos. I stood for a long time in the hallway, her words replaying in my mind, "He wanted you to have peace." For years, I thought peace meant the absence of conflict. Now I knew better. Peace, real peace, was the quiet that comes after every storm has said its last word. I walked through the house slowly, touching the furniture, the walls, the photos, each one, no longer just a memory, but a piece of a puzzle, finally solved. The afternoon light poured in through the lace curtains, dust particles floating like tiny ghosts of the past. I picked up the family portrait from the mantel, the one taken 10 years ago before David's heart attack, before Lily moved away, before Thomas stopped laughing. We looked perfect in that photo, like every family tries to look when the camera is watching. But what the picture didn't show was the exhaustion behind my smile, the unspoken distance between my husband and me, and the two children who were already beginning to live in separate worlds. It's strange how photographs freeze happiness that never really lasted. People still debate whether it's better to preserve the illusion of family harmony or to let the cracks show. I used to choose illusion. It was easier. That night, I called Thomas and Lily and asked them to come back one more time. There was something I needed to say that couldn't wait. They arrived after sunset. We sat again around that same table, though this time there were no contracts or letters between us, just 3 mugs of tea and the sound of rain outside. I met her, I said quietly. Who? Lily asked. Claire Foster. She came here today. Thomas's face stiffened, but I raised a hand. It's not what you think. She wasn't here to demand anything. She showed me proof of what your father did. He created a trust fund for her. That's all. She didn't want our house, Thomas. She wanted closure. Lily exhaled slowly. So all this, all the fighting, the papers, the fear, it was for nothing. I shook my head. Not for nothing. Your father forced us to face ourselves. We had to confront who we were and who we'd become when trust disappeared. Thomas leaned back, rubbing his temples. It's ironic. Dad always preached about honesty, yet he built this web of secrets to teach us about it. Maybe that was the only language he knew I said. He wasn't trying to lie. He was trying to control what he couldn't fix. For a while, we just listened to the rain tapping on the windows. Then Lily smiled faintly. You know, I think he succeeded. We're sitting here together, aren't we? No yelling, no lawyers, no contracts. Thomas chuckled softly. No roast chicken either. That made all of us laugh, and for the first time in months, the sound didn't feel strained. It felt real. Rebecca joined us later, bringing in a tray of cookies. She had been quiet through most of this ordeal, holding everything together in her calm, gentle way. You know, she said, I think families break, not because of one big lie, but because of all the little truths they never say out loud. I nodded, and we said them now. Maybe too late, but we did. Thomas looked at me. So what happens next, Mom, with the house, I mean? I smiled faintly. We keep it like we said, but not as property, more as a promise. We'll maintain it together. Every year we'll meet here. No excuses. We'll open that box under the oak tree, add something new, maybe a letter, a photo, a memory, and bury it again, so that the next generation, when we're gone, will find it and know who we were. Lily's eyes softened. A family time capsule. Yes, I said. A living memory. We spent the rest of the evening talking about the good things, the road trips, the birthday disasters, the nights we laughed until our stomachs hurt. For once, we weren't dissecting the past. We were remembering it. Around midnight, after they left, I went out to the backyard alone. The rain had stopped and the sky was clear, dotted with stars. I sat beneath the oak tree, feeling the damp earth under my hands. It was strange to think that beneath my feet, hidden in the roots, were the echoes of everything we'd been through. Love, anger, confusion, forgiveness, all compressed into one patch of soil. I looked up at the branches swaying gently and whispered, You did it, David. You brought us home. The next morning, I woke to sunlight streaming through the curtains. For the first time in a long time, the house didn't feel heavy. It felt awake. I made breakfast and hummed an old tune David used to play on the piano, one of those songs that linger in your head like a ghost that means well. Around noon, there was a letter in the mailbox. It was from Mr. Gray. The envelope was thin, stamped from a distant address. I opened it carefully. Dear Mrs. Collins, it read, I am pleased to hear that you and your family have reached a resolution. Your husband was a man of foresight, and I was honored to help fulfill his last request. My representation of the Foster estate is now officially closed. The original contract will be archived as per his instructions, and the property remains under your collective ownership. Please note, he asked that you read the final paragraph of his will, one that was intentionally sealed until this moment. Attached was a photocopy of the sealed paragraph. My heart pounded as I read it. In the event that my family reconciles and chooses to remain together under one roof, the property deed shall bear the name, the Collins Family Trust. It is not to be sold mortgaged or divided. It shall serve as a home not for possession, but for remembrance. I smiled through tears. David's last line read, When a family stops arguing over who owns the house, that's when they finally deserve to call it home. I folded the letter carefully and placed it inside the old tin box under the oak tree later that day. It felt right, like sealing the story where it belonged. In the weeks that followed, life didn't return to normal. It built something new instead. Thomas started visiting more often, fixing things around the house. Lily began painting again. She said the light in this house was different, like it remembers. Even Rebecca, who'd quietly held us all together, smiled more freely now. I hosted dinner every Sunday just like before, but this time there were no secrets, no tension, no knives disguised as smiles. We even left a seat empty at the table for David, not as a symbol of loss, but as a reminder that he was still part of everything we shared. Sometimes I catch myself talking to him when I water the roses or watch the sunset through the kitchen window. I tell him about Thomas's new job, about Lily's art show, about how the roof still leaks, no matter how many times we fix it. And in those quiet moments, I swear, I can almost hear him chuckle, that soft, familiar sound that used to make me feel safe. People still debate whether love survives death. I think it does not as presence, but as echo. Now every time I pass that oak tree, I smile, not because of what's buried beneath it, but because of what grew from it: forgiveness, understanding, and a family that learned finally how to stay. The following months unfolded like a second spring, slow and deliberate, as if the house itself was breathing again after years of holding its breath. Thomas began spending weekends repainting the shutters, while Lily filled the living room with canvases and sketches, each one bursting with the kind of color that used to terrify her yellows, too bright reds, too raw blues, too honest. Rebecca turned the old study into a reading room, saying she could still feel David's energy there, like a whisper that told her which books he never got to finish. And me, I learned how to live inside silence again, but this time it wasn't loneliness. It was peace. One morning, while cleaning out the attic, I found a small box I hadn't seen before. Inside were family receipts, movie tickets, an old toy car, and a cassette labeled Voices. Curious, I brought it downstairs, dusted off David's old tape player, and pressed play. Static, then laughter. Lily's voice as a child yelling something about birthday candles. Thomas's boyish laughter following her. And then David's voice, warm, steady, alive. Someday, he said, "You'll listen to this and remember what it felt like to love without knowing how much it mattered." That was the moment I broke down again, not from grief, but from gratitude. Because sometimes the cruelest truth about love is that we don't realize its size until it's already turned into an echo. People still debate whether it's better to move on or to hold on. I used to think moving on was the only way to survive, but now I think holding on with gentleness, not desperation, is what keeps us human. That same week, I received a small invitation card in the mail. It was from Claire Foster. She was hosting a memorial exhibit for her mother and wanted me and my children to attend. For a moment, I wasn't sure if it was a good idea. Old wounds have a way of reopening when you least expect them. But something in me said we needed to go not for closure, but for continuation. The gallery was downtown, a minimalist space filled with photographs, sketches, and journals. The exhibit was titled Trust and Truth. The first piece we saw was a large black and white portrait of Elaine Foster, her face strong yet kind, and beside it was a letter written by David Partnership. Is not about property, it's about purpose. I felt Lily grip my hand. "He really admired her," she whispered. Claire appeared then, smiling warmly. "He did," she said softly. They built something together that had nothing to do with money. My mother used to say David was the only man who could talk about numbers and make them sound like poetry. Thomas chuckled. "Yeah, that sounds like him." Claire guided us to a smaller section of the gallery where a single painting hung under dim light. It was a landscape, our home, the Collins house, surrounded by the oak tree in full bloom. "He gave this to her years ago," Claire said. She said it reminded her that even the most complicated roots can grow something beautiful. For a long time, we stood there in silence, each of us seeing not just the painting, but the story it carried. It wasn't about two families divided by inheritance. It was about two legacies, intertwined by trust. After the exhibit, Claire and I talked privately near the entrance. "You know," she said, "I used to resent your family. I thought my mother gave too much to your father's work, that she lived in his shadow. But now I see they were both trying to build something that lasted longer than themselves." I smiled gently. "Maybe they succeeded. Look at us, two families finally at peace." She nodded. "You're welcome at the foundation anytime. It's partly yours, you know. Your husband helped create it." On the drive home, I realized how much had changed. Thomas hummed quietly in the front seat, while Lily stared out the window, lost in thought. "It's funny," she said, finally. "Dad brought two families together without living to see it." "That's what vision is," I replied. "Planting seeds you'll never see bloom." When we got home, the sun was setting and the light through the oak leaves made the garden shimmer like gold. Thomas carried in some of Claire's brochures. Rebecca set the table, and Lily stood in the doorway of the kitchen, smiling at the sound of us moving around each other. No tension, no hesitation, just the rhythm of family life rediscovered. That evening, as we sat down for dinner, I noticed something I hadn't in years. We were eating slower, listening more, laughing softly without guilt. The weight that had once pressed down on this house had lifted. After dinner, I went out to the porch with my cup of tea. The moon hung low, pale, and watchful, as if guarding what we'd rebuilt. I thought about how David had orchestrated this entire story, like a conductor leading a symphony from beyond the stage. Every letter, every secret, every heartbreak designed to lead us here to this quiet moment of understanding. I could almost hear his voice. "See, you didn't need me to keep you together. You just needed a reason." In that stillness, I remembered something he used to say when we were young and broke and happy. Families don't fall apart overnight. They fade when no one's brave enough to tell the truth. He was right. Maybe all those years of silence weren't betrayal, they were fear. Fear of losing control, fear of being wrong, fear of being hurt again. And yet here we were, hurt but whole. It's strange, but the older I get, the more I understand that forgiveness isn't a gift you give to someone else. It's something you do to clean your own heart so it doesn't drown in bitterness. A few days later, Thomas came to me with an idea. "Mom," he said, "I've been thinking about turning part of the house into a community space, a small family archive and reading room. Something to honor Dad and his work with Elaine. Maybe even name it the Collins Foster Center for Family Trusts." I smiled. "That's beautiful, Thomas. Your father would have loved that," Lily added. "We could host art exhibits, workshops, turn the house into a place that tells our story." For the first time, I didn't just feel like a keeper of the past. I felt like a participant in the future. That night, I wrote in my journal a habit I'd abandoned years ago. My first entry was simple. "Today, my family began again, not from inheritance, but from understanding." I closed the book, turned off the lights, and sat by the window watching the moonlight spill across the oak tree. Its branches swayed gently in the wind, like an old friend waving from afar. David had been right about one thing we had to read between the lines. And between those lines, hidden in contracts and silence and grief, was something timeless, love imperfect but enduring. A full year passed after that day, though it feels like a lifetime folded neatly into 12 quiet months. The house that once echoed with conflict now hummed softly with life again. The repairs were finished, the walls repainted in the same pale ivory David always liked, and the garden bloomed wildly that spring, as if nature itself had been waiting for us to forgive each other. The Collins Foster Center had opened officially, a modest room filled with letters, photographs, and documents that told the strange, beautiful story of two families learning to coexist beyond law, beyond resentment. Every Sunday, we opened the house to visitors, students studying law or psychology, local neighbors curious about the family that built peace from paperwork. Sometimes I'd tell them the story myself, in the same calm tone I used to tell bedtime stories to my children, and every time I reached the part about the knock at the door, the room would go still. There was something universal about it, how a stranger can show up one evening and change everything you thought you understood about love, legacy, and loyalty. Thomas handled most of the administration, balancing work and fatherhood with a gentleness that reminded me of the boy who used to bring me daisies from the yard. Lily, now an artist with her own small gallery downtown, often curated new exhibits in the family room, her paintings reflecting not grief, but growth, hands reaching for each other through branches, faces half hidden behind layers of color. Rebecca ran weekly reading circles under the oak tree where children sat cross-legged in the grass as sunlight danced across their faces. And me, I had finally learned to sit still without needing to fill the silence. People still debate whether family healing ever truly ends or whether it just changes shape. I've come to believe healing isn't a destination. It's a rhythm, one that carries you forward even when you think you've stopped moving. One evening near the anniversary of David's passing, I felt an ache I hadn't felt in a while. The ache of missing him not as a husband, but as a companion in understanding. I went to the backyard to the oak tree that had become the heart of our home. The ground beneath it was firm, the grass lush. I could almost see the outline of where we'd buried the tin box, now filled with new mementos, photos, notes, a newspaper clipping from the center's opening day. I whispered into the air, "We did it, David." We finally read between the lines. The wind shifted slightly, carrying the scent of rain and lilac. It felt like an answer. Inside on the mantel stood a framed copy of David's final letter, the one that ended with, "If they can agree, they'll understand. And if they understand, they'll forgive." That line had become our quiet family motto, engraved on a small plaque we placed at the center's entrance. Visitors would often pause to read it before stepping inside, as if taking a breath before entering someone else's truth. About 2 months ago, Mr. Gray sent one last letter. He had retired, moved to the coast, and wanted to thank me for fulfilling the truest clause of all. Enclosed was a photograph taken decades ago of him, David, and Elaine standing together outside their old office. On the back, in David's handwriting, it said, "Guardians of Trust." I smiled. I understood now why David had trusted him despite the confusion his presence had caused. Sometimes the hardest roles to play are the ones that make others question your loyalty. I framed the photo and placed it in the center beside the original contract, the same document that had once terrified me. Now it was a relic of transformation, a reminder that what begins in fear can end in clarity. On the first anniversary of our reconciliation, the whole family gathered under the oak tree again. We hosted what Thomas called a living memorial. Neighbors, friends, and even Claire Foster attended. She had become part of our story in the most unexpected way, helping with the Foundation's outreach program for young adults studying law and ethics. When she arrived, she hugged me warmly and said, "Your husband gave my life direction. You gave it peace." We shared stories, laughter, and even some of the old family jokes David used to tell. Lily painted live during the event, capturing the crowd under the oak tree brushstrokes of greens and golds that made it look like the sky itself had joined the celebration. That night, after everyone left, I stayed outside, sitting in the glow of lanterns, strung across the branches. I thought about how everything began with a knock, how a stranger's visit on a quiet evening had unraveled decades of silence and built something that would outlast us all. I also thought about how fragile trust had seemed back then, like a thin thread that could snap at any moment. But the truth is, trust doesn't break easily. It bends, it frays, but if you pull gently enough, it weaves itself back together. There's one more thing I discovered, something I've never told anyone. A few weeks ago, while cleaning the center, I found an old dictaphone hidden in David's desk drawer. The tape inside was labeled, "For Her." My hands trembled as I pressed play. His voice, older and softer than I remembered, filled the room. "If you're listening to this, my love, I'm gone. But I want you to know you were never just the keeper of our home, you were the keeper of our reason. Every contract, every clause, every hard decision I made was meant to protect what you built. You taught me that love isn't about having the last word, it's about being the last person standing when the words run out. If you ever doubt yourself, look out the window at that oak tree. Every root, every branch, it's your strength holding us together." The recording clicked off, leaving only silence. I sat there for a long while, smiling through tears. That was his final gift, not the letter, not the property, not even the peace he forced us to find, but the reminder that what we build in love doesn't disappear when we're gone. It becomes the soil others grow from. As I write this now, sitting at the kitchen table where it all began, I can hear Thomas fixing something in the garage, Lily laughing in the garden, and Rebecca humming softly as she sets the table for dinner. The windows are open and the scent of the roses drifts in. The light outside turns golden, that same color it was on the night the stranger first knocked. If someone asked me what the true meaning of legacy is, I'd say it's not the house, the documents, or the inheritance. It's the ability to pass on love that outlives misunderstanding. And maybe that's the real contract David wrote, the one invisible to lawyers, and paper written instead in the hearts of the people he left behind. People still debate whether forgiveness truly frees us or simply softens the pain. I think it does both. It doesn't erase what happened, but it lets you breathe again. As I close this chapter of my life, I realize something simple, yet profound. We spend so much time trying to protect what we have that we forget to nurture who we are. The real wealth wasn't the house. It was us, flawed, stubborn, wounded, but still here, still trying, still together. The stranger's knock had once brought confusion, but now, when I think of it, I imagine it differently. Not as an ending, but as an invitation. An invitation to open the door to truth, to healing, to love that endures even when everything else fades. The house is quiet again tonight, but it's a different kind of quiet, not the silence of absence, but the calm that follows resolution. The wind moves softly through the curtains, the clock ticks with an easy rhythm, and the oak tree outside sways as if it's breathing along with us. I sit at the same table where everything began, the knock, the contract, the confusion, and I realize how far we've come from that moment. What once felt like betrayal now feels like revelation. Grief has turned into gratitude, anger into understanding. The papers that once bound us in fear now live in the family center as symbols of what trust can survive. David's presence is everywhere, but not in a haunting way, in the warmth of the morning light on the windows, in the laughter echoing down the hallway, in the soft hum of life continuing. Sometimes I catch myself listening for that knock again, not out of dread, but as a reminder that every disruption carries a lesson. That strangers might not always come to take something away. Sometimes they arrive to return what was lost. I look around and see my family, my grown children, their partners, their children, all gathered here once a week as we promised. The house is no longer a fortress of secrets. It's a living story, one that breathes through generations. So if you've made it with me this far tonight, thank you. Maybe this story wasn't just mine. Maybe it's for anyone who's ever opened a door they were afraid to, only to find that love was standing on the other side disguised as a stranger. Now turn off the lights, maybe keep the fan humming, and rest easy. Good night.